Okay, folks, I think we'll get underway. It's 9:30. Ali, can I invite you to open the meeting with the karakia, please?
Whakakatā te hau ki te uru. Whakakatā ka te hau ki te tonga. Kia makinakina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai. E he ake ana te atakura. Hei teo, hei huka, hei hauhu, tihei moriora.
Thanks, Ali. Kia ora koutou, welcome everyone. It's been a while, as they say, between drinks, so it's it's good to see you all for our first meeting of this calendar year. I know you've all been busy with lots of other things, but this is my first time in this calendar year, so it's good to see you all. I'm looking forward to working with you for the balance of the year, or at least up until the election. In terms of apologies, Hecate is unwell and may join us online, but I haven't seen if that's the case. So I think we'll just move an apology. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, David. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. All right. Can I ask if there are any conflicts of interest to declare for today's meeting? If not, well, that's good, thank you. I've not been informed of any public participation, so we can come straight to item 4, which is the confirmation of the public minutes from our meeting of the 21st of November. Happy to move. Thank you, David. Is there any discussion on those? No? Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Thank you, Yada. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Say aye. Carried. And we also have the public. I knew you were coming. You only just. You can do all that running, Roz. Welcome, Roz. We've got the minutes of the public excluded part of our meeting of the 21st of November. Can I have someone to move it? Thank you, David. A seconder? Do I have a seconder for those minutes? Yeah. Thank you, Roz. Is there any discussion on them? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. All right, that gets us through all of those procedural bits and pieces. So can we just do the update on the actions, Ali?
Kia ora koutou katoa, good morning. I'll take the report as read, just noting that most of them are still in progress with 2 closed, the one on the top of page 2 and the only item on page 3. So the Metlink report on bus safety risks and the harbour management showing a layout of the buoys, but those 2 have closed. Are there any comments or feedback on this point?
Roz?
Not on those actions that you raised, but just generally on the flood risk that we've pushed to March, I think, workshop in March. I had a conversation with Pat from Wellington Water, and he's done quite a lot of work at the Wellington Water end to properly ascertain the global flood risk in any given year. So we've now got a lot more information going into that workshop. So I think that was absolutely the right decision to push that to when we had the key bits of information that we needed. So I don't know whether you've been able to touch base with Wellington Water, but they've done a lot of work around that, so it's good.
Yes, just to confirm that in terms of the workshop in March, we are working alongside Jeremy and Erin to pull together the slides and the workshop items for that workshop. So yeah, we will be getting a Wellington Water flavour from that as well.
I just would note, Jacob did his darndest to see if I could attend that. It conflicts for me with another commitment. I will, if I can, make it to that workshop because I'm keen to kind of participate and hear what's said, but it just sort of coincides with an event at which I'm speaking, and it's a bit hard to kind of not turn up when you're doing that. All right, If there's nothing else on the actions, thank you, Ellie. Let's come then to, that's just for information, let's just come then to item 7, the quarterly finance update. Ashwin.
Thank you, Fracture, and good morning, everyone. So this paper presents the financial results of the Council for the second quarter ended December 2024. The forecast numbers for Q2 have been updated based on the actual performance for Q2, except for Metlink. Apologies, the numbers were not ready in time at the time of writing this paper, but they have been since updated and will be presented to Council on Thursday. The revenue variance is mainly driven by the NLTP funding shortfall on capital projects, Lindrum, and Farebox revenue being lower than anticipated. The forecast revenue numbers are also in a way driven by the same factors, and we continue to keep a close eye on Metlink's financial performance. The forecast expenditure variance is largely driven by the accounting change in the national ticketing solution. The forecast capital spend variance is again largely driven by NLTP shortfall, Lindrum, and water, the Te Marua capacity optimization project. I'll take the report as read and happy to take any questions from the committee.
Can I invite questions? Ross, and then Yadna.
So in quite a few places throughout the report, under quite a few different kind of cost areas, it identifies the fact that both contractor spending is down and staff wages are down due to holding vacancies. The two of them concern me, especially as it's kind of a bit of a theme across this whole report: contractor spending down, staff wages down because we're holding vacancies. And I guess I didn't get a flavour from this paper of what the actual consequences of that are across the organisation. It would suggest that we really have reduced capacity to do everything. And so I'm trying to get a sense of what the consequences of those decisions are.
Through you, Chair. It is not reduced capacity, it is just management of vacancies and recruitment for new positions. There's a lot of positions in the new restructure of the Environment Group that through the LTP process and through our current processes where we are delaying to make sure that we achieve those savings. And the numbers here, if you may recall, in the budget have a 2.5% sort of vacancy built into them, and we actually run normally at a much higher vacancy rate than that. It has been dropping in terms of turnover, but we should have, it should run accurately and without reduced capacity, just lots of planning on the work stages and the application of staffing. Did you want to add anything, Nigel?
No, thanks. That's a good answer. So it is a deliberate attempt to kind of look at actually how we budget going into the year ahead, and it's taken through the council through the annual plan process. It's not so much reducing capacity, it's just staging and phasing when we bring new people on, which will allow us to do more, but it's not reducing what we can currently do. And as Ellie also said, our turnover currently is around 80%, which is obviously extremely low compared with the last few years. And that does mean we have quite a lot of stability in the workforce as well, because it's not turning over at such a rate.
It's really good to have obviously a stable workforce, but it's not worth commenting on if it's within expected boundaries, I guess. But the fact that it has been mentioned suggests that it is outside those expected boundaries, and that combined with several $1 million reduced in consultants does paint a picture of less available people to do the work. So if that's not the case, perhaps don't pull it out of the report and highlight it.
Through Chair, it's commented on because it's under active management.
Okay, Yadna.
Cool. Thank you for this. My question's just around paragraph 7, just to understand the reassessed revenue recognition milestones for Lindrum. Could someone just elaborate and explain that like I'm 5? Thank you.
Through your chair, with Lindrum, there has been a delay in the procurement, as highlighted in previous FRAC meetings. So what that means is the overall program, there's no delay, but there's a delay in the revenue milestones that we'll be looking at going forward. So that's what it's trying to capture.
Chris.
Thank you. Just the national ticketing item and that. So we've put the costs into expenses for a number of years now, and we will be capitalising those, taking them out of expenses, and then we'll depreciate them when we've got all of the national ticketing costs. Will they go over 10 years or something like that? Will they?
Through your chair, with the national ticketing solution, because there are a couple of councils which are on the same boat like us, we've got PwC external advice on the accounting treatment of the spend, and it will be treated like a prepaid asset on the balance sheet, but not necessarily depreciated. So it's like a prepaid asset which will be then apportioned back to the P&L as we start using that service in future years. I can't recall the total number of years that the NTS is for, but I can check that out and come back to you.
No, that's good as gold. Just making sure I fully understand what we're looking at. Thank you.
Ashwin, can I just pick up, and I'm mindful councillors are seeing this and through other sort of committee meetings and so on, but I'm mindful of, some of the changes as you've described are as a result of accounting policy. So the actual cost to council is unchanged. It's just that it's recognised over a different period than was originally estimated. So it's essentially becomes a multi-year thing and shifts in terms of timing. What concerns me more, I suppose, is to understand just where there are sort of genuine structural issues. I know Roz's question kind of was starting to touch on that, was whether kind of what we were seeing was something that actually could impact on performance, and I'm reassured given your answer about that. I suppose I am mindful, notwithstanding the fact that we haven't got the Metlink numbers, that we are seeing a year-on-year trend around the farebox kind of numbers. And I'm just kind of, my question, I suppose, is what is our view about sort of what appears to be a structural difference in sort of forecast revenue?
Sorry, through a chair, I think with the Metlink, I know Ali was quite keen to answer that particular aspect of it.
Thank you, Ashwin, and through you, Chair. Firstly, may I reassure, as part of the annual plan process, we are revisiting the fare budgets for next year. We have already bought draft numbers, but they are likely to change. But we will be ensuring that there's a balanced budget for that process, so to make sure that that's offset if there is a reduction. That's not looking to be too significant at this point, but we will reduce it down. You will be aware that one of the comments that Standard & Poor's made was that improving the accuracy of our forecasting and our budgets in that space was something that they would be watching. So we're being very careful and putting a lot of focus in that area. For the current year's forecast, we will bring that to council and we're on Thursday, and we are taking a similar approach, but I will talk about the risks and the options at that point, but we won't need to take them until the numbers are more solidified.
Thanks, Sally. Any other questions on the quarterly report from committee members? Chris?
Just coming back to the national ticketing system then, so I fully understand it. Will that have a...
Oh, sweet, easy, thank you.
Sorry. Will that have an impact on the... on our... What impact will that have on this year's budget? Will it give a substantial saving of the 27 million, I think, that's mentioned in the comments there? Would that be right?
Through your chair, in terms of the national ticketing solution for the current year, one is in terms of the actual presentation, you'll have the revenue being recognized in the P&L, profit and loss, but the actual expenditure will be sitting in the balance sheet. So we might have showing a favorable position from that perspective. And in terms of the actual overall position, I think with NTS, I think by the end of the year, we are expecting a little bit of a under budget. Ali, can you confirm on that?
For this financial year, did you say? Yes, currently, but that would be carried forward anyway.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the impact on that, because I know transport's quite difficult at the moment, the government shortfall in funding, the fares shortfall and that sort of thing. And when I look at the revised budget and that, I see that it's out by about the total OPEX is down by about billion or so less. And I was just wondering whether some of that's the impact of the changes that we're making here.
Chair, it's a combination of both. It's a combination of both. And as Ali mentioned, with Metlink, we are keeping a close eye on it. And in subsequent meetings, we will give you a better picture of what we expect it to be by the end of the financial year.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, can I just kind of finish this by acknowledging again, I think the quality of the reporting we're getting, I actually think the information provided and the way it's provided is very user-friendly. So thank you for your work in helping inform us. We're asked to accept the financial report for the second quarter ended 31 December. Can I have someone move that? Thank you, Anna. A seconder. Thank you, Chris. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Ashwin, let's come to item 8, which is the Audit New Zealand management reports, both for council and the regional holdings.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So today we're just presenting an information paper on the management report for Audit New Zealand for the Council and WLC Holdings Group for the year ended 30th June 2024. I guess matters to note in the Council report, there were just 3 new recommendations that were raised by Audit New Zealand in 23-24, and that was similar for WLC Holdings. There were just 3 new recommendations raised for 23-24, and we're just happy to take any questions anybody might have.
Can I perhaps open the batting with a question, which is just acknowledging the items arising out of both audits actually are quite modest indeed. So, firstly, let's acknowledge that the auditors have gone around and, looked under the carpet and down the back of the couch and haven't found very much. So well done to the team. I suppose what I am interested in is where they have raised issues in both cases, and I won't go through the list, but in several cases, the management comment is we don't agree with the auditors. And I just kind of wonder how we get to a point where those actually can be closed as issues rather than sit there because we kind of disagree. So my question to you is kind of how do we get to a point of at least an understanding where we agree to disagree and we can remove it as an open issue?
So with the audit recommendations, typically what we try to do is when they have been raised in a particular year, usually they bring it up towards the end of the audit, so it doesn't give us any chance to look at resolving it in the same year. But in the current financial year, which is 24-25, we'll be working actively with them in order to close and resolve the issues to their satisfaction. So that will be our aim. Fingers crossed, by the end of this year, for this year's audit, the number of issues should be minimal, and the previous year issues should be closed to their satisfaction.
Roz?
I have a couple of questions, but the first one, I feel like it's a really cabbage question. What is this? We get a lot of reports from Audit New Zealand, and I don't understand what this is and where this fits in the hierarchy of documents that we get from them and what we're supposed to take away from this.
Through your chair, so every year under legislation, auditors such as Audit New Zealand, out of external auditors, they are required to audit the council, and they are required to give an assurance to the FRAC and also to councillors that the operations of the organization are being run properly. There are no deficiencies in terms of any control issues or from a fraud perspective, that there's nothing which raises alarm bells. So it's a way of giving FRAC and council some assurance on the way council manages its operations, and it could be from your day to day. It could be like something from whether we are making a good payment to suppliers, following the right controls, or we are collecting money from ratepayers in the right and appropriate way. So it's basically an assurance to yourselves that there's nothing there that
I
needs
guess
to
I'm
be
just
looked
commenting
at.
on the timing of this, and so normally the auditors do the review of the long-term plan and the annual plan to ensure everything that we're saying in there is true, and then they come back and do the report that goes along with when we publish the annual report, and they audit the finances. Um, is this like a summary of that exercise?
Through a chair, um, Audit New Zealand audits the long-term plan and then the annual reports. They do not audit the annual plan. And the annual report basically looks at what have we set out in the long-term plan for each of the 3 years and subsequent annual plans. And they look at how are we monitoring our performance in terms of the actuals against the plan. So when they come and audit, they look at a lot of things like what's in our budget for the year, what's our actual spend for the year, and what's the reasons for the variance. But also they're looking at, from an accounting perspective, are we accounting under the accounting standards framework in the right and appropriate way? Yeah.
Maybe I can attempt to help a little bit too. I mean, the two reports in front of us are essentially, and I don't want to minimise in any way, but essentially a byproduct of their audit work. The primary output of Audit New Zealand's work is what is sometimes referred to as the short form audit opinion, which is included in the annual report, and that's where they say.
When Clint comes and talks to us with
his
lot of people.
And the report is there to say to the readers of this document, we've been in, we've kicked the tires, we've seen the evidence, we're comfy with these numbers and this report being kind of broadly right. They're not saying that's materially right. This report is essentially the report to management saying, and in the course of the audit, we had a few issues that we've kind of seen or not, and in this case, it's mostly not. We've been and done all of these things, and these are the 2 or 3 things that we've picked up that you should have a think about. And so they're less about providing assurance to the readers of the documents. They're more about saying, here's some opportunities for improvement, and they're targeted more at management. And that's why I was asking my question around management's response to those recommendations, because auditors are saying, we think you should do X, and management is saying, well, actually, we don't agree. So in order for the issue to go away, at some point, we need to kind of at least agree to disagree and park it. But these reports are very firmly just, in a sense, targeted at management to say, here's some things we've kind of tripped over when we did the audit. They don't affect our view on the material that's been released, because that's what we've said. And even with the short form audit opinion, I think, in this case, what's significant, and it's come up year after year, is there is an emphasis of matter, I think it is, in relation to the greenhouse gas emission measures. And that's where they're saying, essentially, we've tried to audit this. We just don't have sufficient comfort about the evidence to say, we can put a tick against those numbers. And that's largely, it's not saying they're wrong, it's just saying when, in order to express a view on it, we need to have confidence that the evidence is sufficient to support this representation.
That is extremely useful, thank you. So that kind of puts the information in front of us in context. So as you say, the climate emissions has been an ongoing issue that they've raised every year, and I guess we're at a little bit of an impasse on that, and that was kind of my reading. It's like they say one thing, we still feel that presenting the information, albeit in a way that they don't feel they can audit sufficiently, we still feel that's the better option to go down. So I kind of read that within that context. The 2 other issues that I took away from this report was one about flood management valuations and one about timeliness of getting them our information. The one about flood management stuff I found a little bit confusing, and also I won't say like contradictory within the report. Sometimes they said this is real good, and sometimes they were like, oh, you need to do this other thing. So I didn't come away at the end of it with an overall view of what we were doing wrong and what we needed to do in future. The timeliness of information appeared, to my reading, to be partly driven by Snapper, and given that we're moving towards the national ticketing system, I assumed that the only way to improve that would be to invest more in Snapper and their information, and we wouldn't want to do that given we're about to change platforms. Can you comment on both of those?
Sure. So in terms of the flood protection valuation, I think you're right, which is audit have acknowledged that the valuation work that we did this year, and unlike other valuations that we do for other infrastructure projects, flood protection we do in-house. So we've got all the right people with the right skills in-house. So they were very happy with the way they did the valuation. Over the last few years, there's been a lot of audit focus on valuations on account of the way the unit rates are calculated for the valuations. And they see that as an area of risk perspective. So they've got their own independent valuer in-house that they look at. And typically, there's always going to be a bit of a difference in terms of the way you interpret the valuation. So what they've tried to comment on is their own valuers have reviewed the work that we have done. And although on one end they were happy with the overall aspect, there were still some areas for improvement. And that's what they've tried to highlight, that maybe going forward, we can improve on a few areas which did not have a major aspect or major impact in terms of the reporting for us.
They talk about rates of depreciation. Is that actually the flood management like the stock bank? Because the land doesn't depreciate, right? So, again, I probably don't need to get into I don't need to understand this, but I was struggling with exactly what was being depreciated and how that affected the value that we were coming up with.
Yes, so in terms of the flood protection portfolio of assets, majority is land, but we also have non-land assets like buildings and other improvements, and they are subject to depreciation. So they are more specified or more focused on those assets which are depreciable and looking at the way the accounting standards tell us to do something. So it's quite technical, as I rightly mentioned. Yeah. In terms of Snapper, so that again, since Snapper is an independent entity, we do audit them to give an assurance on the data that they collect, and then they send it over to us. And through our head of risk and assurance, Jacob, we manage that relationship quite well. Over the last few years, we have had some issues in terms of getting the work done from Snapper, but we have seen an improvement as well in terms of the timeliness of it. And this year, again, through Jacob's work, we have engaged them quite early. And we also involved audit in the initial meeting. So to ensure that Snapper understands exactly what auditors are expecting them to do, and then agreeing on a set of timeframes so that it doesn't hinder or impact the timeframes that audit work towards. So this year we're expecting a better or a further improvement as compared to the previous year.
Thanks, Ross. I mean, good questions, and I do think it's not unreasonable to expect that the auditors will raise questions like these. We pay a large fee, so you'd expect them to sort of find something to kind of. So, and it's healthy that there's an engagement around some of these sorts of issues. And even just to the point about the emphasis of matter in the audit opinion on the greenhouse gas emissions figures. So I think it is a good thing that efforts are made to report this. I think from our perspective, we have to have kind of sufficient comfort that we know that the number's not misleading. But I think it's equally helpful for the auditors to say, if you're reading this, you should just be aware that, we have been able to fully verify this. I think that's the whole point of them doing their job. But I don't think we should resolve from reporting stuff just because the auditors have a different view. All right, unless there's any other questions on the audit reports, those are for information. Thank you both. Grant, that brings us to your report. Welcome.
Good morning. I'll take the report as read. Yeah, nothing significant since then. Are there any questions?
Ross.
Two from me. One about the open water swimming in Oriental Bay. Just more so that I can go for a swim without feeling endangered. What exactly do the buoys signify?
Okay, so a couple of years ago, when we were having conflict issues between rowers and swimmers, we put a 1 kilometre buoy just inside Point Jerningham, because a lot of the open water swimmers go for Point Jerningham as a good visual reference, and so do the rowers. And so those with head down and those facing backwards aren't a good combination. So it was giving the swimmers an alternative option for there to create a bit of separation. And we made it 1 kilometre, so it's a meaningful distance for them. What quite a few are doing is following outside the 5 knot buoys and then cutting into the 1K mark, which is also the same area that power boats are slowing down or speeding up when they go in and out of the bay. So they are sort of swimming on the margin of where the boats are unrestricted. This came from a suggestion for some of the swimmers, and what it is basically it serves two purposes. It denotes some distances, so there'll be a buoy at 250, 500, 750 in the 1K. So if they want to do a shorter swim, they can do that. That also came from an incident they had in August when some of the swimmers got caught out with cold water, and encouraging if they want to swim a long way but it's cold, do a few loops rather than go the big distance. The other thing is, as you'll know, when you're swimming, it's hard to see the big distance. So having the buoys a bit more frequently just gives them something to sight along there, which they're currently using the 200 metre markers.
I guess specifically my question was, did these buoys have any legal standing, or are they just...
No, they're
so they don't mean swimmers have to stay on the inside and boaties
No.
have to go slower on it. No, they're
No.
just
So the boat should already be going slow there. We're making them white, not yellow, so no one confuses that that's where they need to slow down. That hasn't changed. It is bringing the swimmers that choose to use it, and you're right, it's not compulsory. It's bringing them inside the area where the boat should be slowing down, so you've got a bit better separation there, and giving them an alternative. We got a variety of feedback from the swimmers. Some thought it was great, some were concerned it could be confusing, what have you. We have got a couple of marker buoys that we already had that we've just painted up white and repurposed, and we'll put them out there for the remainder of summer, stay in touch with the swimmers and basically take their feedback. If the majority feedback is we like them, we'll put some proper buoys in, and we'll actually move the lights to them for winter. If they don't think it's contributing, then we can take them out again.
perfect. That's really useful to know. My other question was about, now I can't find it, but about the, paragraph 13, the emergency ocean response capability. I was just a bit behind the 8 ball in what's going on in that space, and wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit more.
Yes, I realised after I'd finished this that the recent changes haven't been communicated, partially because they happened in late December. So there was nothing in play at the previous FRAC meeting. In last year's budget, 600,000 was allocated to investigating a proposal for emergency towage. That is working towards a government business case, looking at options. That was worked on last year. Towards the end of the year, the outcome of that was a request for interest to relevant parties to the Maritime New Zealand outlined a couple of options, and they looked at who might be interested in contributing to that and how they see the business model might work. They've received feedback on that, and that is feeding into the business case. We're an interested party, but we're not a decision maker or closely connected to it, so that is effectively what I know about it.
Are we, it's so the initial consultation period is closed. They've now gone out for request for interest. Is that
That has been opened and closed as well.
right?
Yep.
Did we submit on the initial report?
Report. It's hard to know which one is the initial report. The,
Are we submitting when they
we-
put something up for submission?
we are in quite frequent communication. They haven't done a submission process as such. The RFI was mostly looking at service providers, which we're not. But even then, one of the consultants running it did get in touch prior to that process. So we're being kept informed as much as we can on what is quite a tightly controlled process.
I guess just being really frank, one of the concerns with having an emergency ocean response capability was that it wouldn't be required for 99% of the time, and so it would be a wasted asset. And we talked about other ways that you could use that, and so I'm just looking to see that we're communicating those options.
Those very thoughts were reflected in the RFI.
Nigel, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, look, just to add to what Grant's saying and the good questions, thanks, Councillor. Look, in addition to what Grant is talking about, and he's quite right, there's certain areas that we won't get involved in when setting like the tendering, for instance, but we are very involved with the Director of MNZ through myself, and Darren remains in contact with the Mayor of Marlborough, who's also got a strong interest in this. We remain quite aligned, and the level of information going through the kind of political and our CE level is still quite strong, and we have actually gone to the Minister via ways of letters in the past, and also we've sought a meeting at some point in time with the Minister on the issue. So I think there's a strong level of information flow, but I think Grant's quite right to point out that the level of actual decision-making influence we have on this is very low.
Sorry, this is sort of further question on this. Ministerial responsibility, am I falsely under the illusion that this is now something Mr. Peters is picking up together with ferry activity or investment decisions, or is that wrong?
Minister Peters is responsible for looking at options for the new ferries, which is a separate process to this. So this is still...
For some reason I thought they'd been bundled, but anyway, that's fine.
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
Okay.
It's still sitting with Minister for Transport on this one.
Cool.
My final question involves the swing mooring inspection. So I'm such a novice, I don't even understand what that is. But what I took away was that we were going from two possible sources where you could get this inspection done to one. And I did just have a concern around the competition elements of a decision like that, and whether that would lead to decreased competition and increased costs for boaties. And so I just wanted assurance that when you were reducing suppliers, you had looked at what the possible costs and implications of a reduction in competition in this market would be for the cost.
Yeah, I share your concerns with most of that. My preference is not to have a single supplier. However, we can't make people do work they don't want to do. So a couple of years ago, we had three companies that were regularly doing this work. As the companies tend to grow and get more other work, this drops off. It is relatively small for them. There's still a possibility we'll have two suppliers, but that's not guaranteed, and that actually does come down to costs. The reality is the costs are likely to go up, and that's not as much because it's going to single supplier, but more actually the cost for doing the work is increasing with compliance costs for the operators. If it's not worth their while, we'll run into a problem where no one does it, and then we're going to have a more of an issue. So we're trying to keep it at least two suppliers so people have options, but I believe even with the two suppliers, there's probably going to be a cost increase. Put in context, this is an inspection that happens every 2 years. your average cost compared to putting in a marina is still significantly less. But we don't want to be picking up broken boats off beaches because moorings have failed either. So it's difficult.
So it's a little bit. I had interpreted this section meaning that we essentially gave permission for multiple operators to do the compliance work, and that we were going to reduce our licensing down to one. But it doesn't sound like that's the case. We're not driving the reduction. It's just the market.
No, we're looking at a position where we may run out of operators.
So that was going to be my question. What are the implications if no one wants to do this? Would we have to do it, and what would the costs be for us doing it?
No, we won't be doing it. That the process is quite fragmented, dealing with a lot of individuals in different areas and what have you, and I think that has driven some of the operators away from it. Just a lot of work for low return, basically. It is possible that if we got to a position where we didn't have operators able to do it, and we did go through a process of looking at appointing a single operator. As it is at the moment, we're looking at taking some of the scheduling in-house, so we can actually, one of my team will speak to mooring owners in an area saying, actually, we've got someone coming in there in 3 weeks' time, this is what you need to pay them, you pay them, and you'll get your mooring done. And then for the inspector, they can go and do 6 moorings, and it's worthwhile. If we get to the point where we could be running out, we'll probably go back to all of those that have been involved and offer them the option of being sole operator, because that actually guarantees more work. The number of moorings we've got are enough to be problematic, but not enough to be a significant business. In Auckland, I think they've got about 4 contractors and 3,500 moorings. We've got about 110 moorings. So it's just, I'm not comfortable with the single supplier option, but we're definitely not driving that.
Thanks, Grant. I think you had a question, and then Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, Grant. As it is summer, so I'm going to do my seasonal question back on the ocean water swimming. I think that's a great idea to test out those buoys. I was just wondering whether our measures for safety are sufficient in a very complicated part of our harbour at that point, particularly in summer where you have that mix of vessels and swimmers. And if we could explore other ways of improving that safety, bearing in mind I think it is difficult to enforce and monitor whatever we put in. Just wanted to get some of your thoughts on that.
Are you specifically talking Oriental Bay or a general?
Yes, Oriental Bay, and I guess we've been hearing anecdotally from members of the public of, say, jet skis or crafts coming in close to, say, Scorching Bay or Oriental Bay and Freiburg Beach in particular.
Yep. This summer that has seemed to be a bit more of an issue. We have our 2 permanent staff and 1 casual out around on the weekends, often in the good weather on the water at the weekends. It is a large patch of harbour and we can't be everywhere. The education, the signage is all still there, especially in Lambton Harbour. We have the advantage with the Maritime Police that will often speak to them, and they're able to be, because they're based right there, first response. There was a discussion a couple of years ago about restricting boats in Oriental Bay. We haven't had the ability to progress that further. You're right in that it's a complex issue. There are multiple users, there are many users that don't cause problems, and trying to get in contact with the ones that do cause problems is an issue. To that extent, that's why in the bylaws are introduced naming of boats, the registration of jet skis, just to try and be able to contact them after the event if we can get the right information from them.
So you were saying you were trying to progress something. What were some of the barriers or issues there?
It would be quite a large consultation process, and capacity is basically
To put in,
to actually talk to all the user groups, put plans together, and go out to the public on it, because you've got a large variety of users in that area, and trying to actually run a reasonable process to do that would be.
I guess it is a very small period of time in the year in Wellington where we have this particular issue.
Yep.
Is there any way that we could have a time-bound response?
Seasonal is an option.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is the boats that you're talking about tend to come out in the same season, so everyone wants to be there. I mean, myself, a couple of weeks ago, we were just with some friends anchored outside the fountain, and kids going for a swim there as well. So it is, something seasonal would make sense, because restricting boats there in winter doesn't. It is it is a good sheltered anchorage in the southerly, so there is a safety feature as to how far out you push boats. It's something that can be looked at, but it's a reasonably complex, multifaceted thing to work through.
I guess the flip side of that is, if something was to happen,
yes,
that's the risk we're dealing with. So yes. I guess I want to understand the comfort we have in sort of acknowledging it's really complex, but also looking proactively at options that we could put in place, such as those seasonal bylaws and so forth. So what is So what would be the action from FRAC now to be able to assist you with that?
Maybe I could suggest, Grant, given the issue's been raised and it does come up, seasonally, perhaps just some further advice or thoughts about options at a future meeting. A bit difficult to put you on the spot right now, kind of given the complexity of what you're saying and the balancing of different interests. So maybe we could just invite you to sort of include in a future report some thoughts about this issue.
I don't think it's just thoughts. I actually think, what are the actions and the steps, so we know how complex it is, because ultimately you want to keep the most vulnerable users safe, but understanding the complexity of enforcing that or creating those conditions. But I think it's really important that we do sort of take some action.
I guess what I meant by the word thoughts was just to come back with some options and recommendations around how this issue might be dealt with in future.
Yeah, creating one thing and enforcement is another one that would be challenging as well. But yeah.
And my next question is in a similar space around paragraph 22 and 23 around the launching areas around mana. And I guess I see it as a similar thing, right? There's an aspect of social license and social responsibility of, who are the most vulnerable users in the water versus craft. What are we looking at in terms of risk there of something that happens in a similar space, I guess, to the open water swimming issue?
To be honest, I would rate that as a far higher risk.
Okay.
I'd say that's quite probable. It is not just about, how to sum that one up? It's not as much the boats. There's an area that is used for launching and retrieving boats, but increasingly it's getting used as a picnic beach. You've got kids walking across an area of sand while people are trying to back trailers. You might ask where the parents are. The parents are parked by the car on the top of the beach watching, and the boaties are getting the hard time of what's happening there. It's not a new issue. It is horribly complex. I prefer to do something with Oriental Bay than this one will be easier. It's multi-agency. We had an active presence there for quite a number of years, and I think that was a positive one. The reason I pulled that out was we were dealing with a possible public injury versus a likely injury to the staff and contractors we had there. Yeah. It ended with an assault on one of our staff. So from my point of view, I'm not aware that anything has changed to the extent it'll be safe to put our staff back. And it is difficult to get engagement on it because everyone that looks at it understands the complexity and shies away. It's yeah, it is challenging. It's one suggestion I've had is actually if that boat ramp got closed off and the boats and trailers weren't there, it'd be all right. For that beach, it would. I suspect that would then see a transfer of boat launching to Dolly Varden on the other side, which is probably a more family-friendly beach and a better place. So you're going to get cars there. This last summer, we've seen a lot of boats launching off the banker from Ngāti Toa Domain into the channel there. PCC received a letter of complaint from someone saying, hang on, there are people playing on the beach and fishing and you've got boats launching here. However, that reduces the volume between the bridges, which is actually a good thing. No one has come up with a good solution for a long time. Well, there was one across the other side, it's too expensive. Yeah, it is challenging, very challenging.
I guess this can't be the only place in Aotearoa where you have this mix of people. Do we have any sort of sense of how other authorities deal with it in their rohe?
The best thing is separate non-compatible activities without any sort of presence there. That can't happen.
Is that because of the expense of setting up a new place to launch?
There was a draft proposal to create a new launching ramp on the southern side of the channel that would just be a launching ramp, it'd be a formed ramp. Would create more car parking, which is adjacent to the park and ride and things there. But that is provision of facilities like that are territorial, they're not done by us. And that was Pairua City Council, and they made the decision that the cost factor was high.
Grant, I'm just mindful of time here. Now, I kind of wonder whether, notwithstanding the issue that's being explored here is a really important issue. I mean, I don't think we're going to find the solution in this meeting. So I wonder if the point of the questions is actually to at least ask for some further advice and comfort around how this risk is dealt with going forward, because clearly in your eyes it's an unacceptable level of risk being carried.
I have very little comfort around this.
Yeah, that's my point. And so it sounds like some further work and advice is needed around how this issue is dealt with going forward.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing these issues with us, because, yeah, it would be good to try and keep people safe out there.
I mean, unfortunately, when there's an accident there, it's going to fall on a lot of agencies, and I know I'll probably
which is why
be
we have to
mindful of
address
that.
it.
Yeah, thank you.
But we're the only one that's ever been out there doing anything about it.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Grant. I wanted to comment on the same issue there, that the point you've made is the responsibility is falling on Greater Wellington and Pairua City Council. Not much more we can do, but the situation is getting worse because it's been a hot summer and there's a lot more people jumping off the bridge again, and that's really prevalent now. It's become a rite of passage. If you're a Pairua person, you've got to jump off the bridge, and the trailer park has been so full that trailers have been parking along the main road through Mana there now. And so the situation's getting worse. We know it's a problem, and I just want to let you know that that's what we're seeing there all the time. So thank you.
Sorry, I'll be very brief, but I'd just like to point out a small problem I have is every time I talk about the launching ramp, the bridge jumping comes up. And from my point of view, I don't care. It's an NZTA problem, it's a road hazard, it's everything else. There are risks of people falling on boats. But actually we put marker poles in. If they stay outside the marker poles, it alleviates the risk on the ramp. So, and that one is another one that you're right, it's a rite of passage, it's not going to change. And if we try and fix that, we'll miss the kid getting run over by the trailer.
So what I think we take from this kind of conversation is there's clearly a key risk there that has to be addressed, notwithstanding the discussion earlier around the sort of Lambton Harbour area. But it would be useful, I think, at least at a future meeting for us to have some further advice around the options and recommendations for how particularly the mana risk is dealt with, because it's clearly unacceptable to you, it's unacceptable to us, and therefore the status quo can't kind of continue really into future summers.
Not recently. Most parties that have been brought into the discussion have avoided getting involved for the very reasons we're aware of.
Okay.
That may have changed, I don't know.
Nigel, did you want to add
Yeah,
something?
we'll do a bit of work on this. We do hear you. I mean, around the Potorua bridge jumping issue, this grant's outlined some of the actions. I think we've been involved in probably 3 or 4 attempts to have a crack at this. The multi-party nature of it is extremely complex, and we can come back around the issue of bylaws. And I think it'd be interesting for the committee to understand the kind of how the bylaw process works, what it can do, and the process you legally have to take to actually change your bylaws. So that is certainly what we can come back with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Appreciate the discussion. It's been kind of helpful to us all, and clearly some important issues to be dealt with. Thank you. Julie.
Kia ora koutou. Happy to take the paper as read and answer questions, but I just would like to draw your attention to the work that has been done to address some of our fatal and severe and higher risk activities since the last meeting. Also the random notifiable event that we had, and also the verdict from the Gibson versus Maritime case, which we will explore in a little bit more detail in the workshop following this meeting. So any questions, please?
Thanks, Julie. Can I open it up? Questions? Ross?
With paragraph 4 and 7, sorry, the numbering's just weird, I've noticed. Quad bikes on utes and Robinson helicopters. I was just wondering what implications. So we're banning temporarily loading quad bikes on the back of utes, and we're not using Robinson helicopters until we review the safety profile of those. What implications are there for our work with having those 2 bans in place?
Yeah. So at the moment, none. We have the alternative solution, temporary solution for trailers. There's probably, I think, about 80 farms we can't get a trailer on, so we're using the Ubco bikes for that. So we can still access everywhere we need to, just not off the back of a ute. We are looking at some engineering solutions, potentially other types of vehicles, or wider use of the Ubco bikes, which actually serve the same purpose as a quad would. We've never banned the use of Robinson helicopters. A lot of other similar entities have. That came on the back of the TASIC watch list decision probably 5 or 6 years ago now. What we did do is took a very risk-based approach to the use of Robinson helicopters generally, the issues associated with mast bump, which was causing the accidents and the fatalities. We don't use them in the environments that, for example, DOC would or some of the other entities do. So we're not putting our people in quite the same position where they're going to come across those situations. So what we've done is a very sort of detailed risk-based paper and outlined 3 options. The first is that we ban them totally, which yes would have quite an impact on our business. The second is that we continue to use them, but we don't allow any Greater Wellington staff members to fly in them. At the moment, we only fly as a reconnaissance or a bit of aerial survey. We don't actually fly in them while, for example, spray work or lifting's being undertaken. Or the third option, and our actual recommendation to the GM of the Environment Group, is status quo, because we believe we've got sufficient procedures and processes and vetting of helicopter users to be able to continue the activity safely for what we use it for. So you've got to look at what's the tool of trade for this particular activity, what's the risk, are we actually managing that risk properly, and we can actually demonstrate that yes, we've got all our processes in place, we're continually reviewing, and that we would quite comfortably recommend that we could continue to use Robinsons. Yeah.
presumably we don't actually have any helicopters.
No.
It's all through contractors.
No.
And so we need, presumably our, I guess, procurement of those services ensures that they are managing all the things that we are concerned about.
Yeah. So we do have a robust procurement policy in place for our helicopter providers. They are on a panel of approved suppliers, bearing in mind there's some strict CAA requirements on them anyway. We always require a safe work plan each time a flight is done, the flight plan, the safety procedures, the emergency response procedures, all really well communicated with our people. Yeah.
As you've just noted, I presume, we would be strongly guided by any notifications out of CAA and or recommendations that the Transport Accident Investigation Commission might make in this space.
So I think it's important to note that CAA have never banned the use of Robinsons. They're still approving their use within the operating envelopes and parameters for those machines and the activities.
And in that context, my understanding, which I qualify as may not be entirely correct, is, providing the helicopters are used within the approved parameters, they are regarded by CAA as safe. It's kind of the circumstances where they might operate outside those safe parameters.
Yeah, and fair to say, in the last, I think it's 3 years, there's been one fatality in a Robinson that was a recreational user. But there have been other fatalities in other types of helicopters. So even though if we chose to ban Robinsons, we don't remove the risk of helicopters in general, and potentially we may be introducing a bigger risk by using a different type of helicopter for the tasks we use Robinsons for. So, yeah.
Other questions? Can I acknowledge, notwithstanding the fact that we have a separate workshop where we'll canvass some of the stuff in further detail, can I first acknowledge the work that has been done duly, particularly around the, acute kind of risk issues and the advice around the Maritime versus Gibson case. I think the work that you've been doing in this space, I think, has been kind of both important and very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from committee members? If not, thank you, and we'll talk more later in the workshop.
Thank you.
Jacob, risk and assurance update.
Thank you very much, Frank. I would just like to, I'll take the paper as read, but I'd just like to highlight the following things in relation to the paper. So significant work has been undertaken around our fraud maturity. So we're focused on or developed a plan to implement 20 recommendations in this area. Particular focus is around improving policy, ensuring that we've got a fraud register, ensuring appropriate trainings in place. So this will help when we perform our next recommendation to ensure that we have a lot more robust fraud maturity in this space. In relation to the totality audit, we've finally begun finalising plans, and we've got 3 tranches in place. The first 2 tranches are focusing on areas like totality policy and Maori data sovereignty. This will again ensure that when we undertake our recommendation, that there is a significant improvement around our maturity in the space. Also note that we implemented 14 recommendations across the business assurance program, which is very positive. And in relation to our insurance, we were able to complete modelling in the space, which reduced our loss limits, which were included within the renewal, which should have some positive impact on our premium. In relation to Riverlink update, I would just like to note that there's actually been significant positive improvements since the paper was developed, particularly in the areas of roles and responsibilities, which are now significantly clearer and are aligned at a CE level. There's also been an extension to timeframes, which has enabled pressure to be taken off the project teams, which is enabling them to manage uncertainty within the space of the project. We also note that the relationship and commercial agreements are almost complete, and they now reflect all partners' requirements. So that's very positive steps over the last month in that space, which is helping alleviate a lot of the uncertainty for the project. I did note that we did also have a couple of questions in relation to the risk update. So one of those was around the Whaitua aquifer. The reason this was included was due to the importance of the aquifer, but we do note that we're still working through ways to understand and resolve this, and agreeing a way forward with Wellington Water and also our Riverlink partners. And also in relation to the Madeline Bridge, we had a question around flood protection, and would just like to note in relation to that that the building specifications and Riverlink are built to a 1 in 440 year level. And we're still working through the flood protection plan, and the designs are not yet complete, so we can't comment on specific areas within that plan. That's it for my update. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. Just one point in regard to the insurance on the rolling stock and the updated modelling. Could we get a copy of that sent to Greater Wellington Rail, please, as the asset owner? We just need to be able to have the opportunity to read that paper and understand it, with a summary from you, hopefully, Jacob. Thanks.
Yes, I can include that for Greater Wellington Rail.
Thank you.
Ros.
So 2 questions from me, one on Riverlink and the other one on the Te Tiriti audit. So on Riverlink, you commented on 2 things, the bridge and the flood specifications and the Waifatu aquifer. I get the bridge issue. I mean, essentially the bridge issue is the nub of Riverlink, right? It's the fact that the bridge constricts the river and heightens the flood risk, and that's why we're doing the whole Riverlink project. The Waifatu aquifer, though, one came as a bit of a surprise, and I know you're not a flood engineer, so you may not be able to answer this, but what I get, obviously, whenever we do gravel extraction or we tutu with the river at all, it runs risks of interfering with the aquifer. But that second paragraph where you say updated modelling has identified that the volume of water available from the aquifer could be reduced more than was initially expected. I didn't know that we were initially expecting a reduction in water volume from the aquifer as a result of what we were doing in Riverlink. And so I would like some more information around what that actually means.
We can provide Frank with an update as part of the action, potentially. In relation to that, the reason it was raised as a risk is because this was highlighted by Wellington Water. So obviously we are sort of acknowledging that there is potential for a risk in the space, but obviously we are working through modelling in this space to help us understand and help manage that. And obviously we are putting in place a control around that if that risk is realised.
I guess so. I didn't realise one, that the volume of water from the aquifer was going to be reduced as a result of Riverlink. I mean, that's always a risk if things go badly, but I didn't understand that was a risk of things going to plan. And now we're saying there's a greater risk. What are our mitigations for that greater risk?
So we're currently undertaking modelling in relation to this space, but also you'll see that within the paper that there's going to be a management approach developed, which will help us understand what the potential impacts will be to help us understand decisions. So that will help us manage any risk within that space. So that is the new control that's been developed.
Nigel, you wanted to add a comment?
Yeah, look, I don't think the risk is fully understood yet. The model is still being run through. It's not in its final iteration of the model. It's involving discussions between Wellington Water, ourselves, Hutt City, and Waka Kotahi, so all the Riverlink partners. So in terms of the impact on that, well, it's not yet known. It may be no impact. If there were an impact, the mitigations would be in terms of how much gravel could be taken out or how much gravel would have to be retained in the system. But right at this point in time, we don't know, and we don't even know if there will be an impact. But the model itself is being run and rerun with all the parties involved, and when we get a final outcome from that, we'll be able to relate that to the Riverlink proposed works, and then understand what the level of risk is and then how we would mitigate that.
Obviously, this has implications for Wellington, for Greater Wellington's bulk water supply, because one of the places we get our water from is the aquifer, and so if we had reduced capacity over next summer, for example, that might have consequences. So it would be really good if we could get an idea of. I'd also be really interested in just what the mechanism is for reducing supply from the aquifer from doing this work, if it all goes to plan. So yeah, if we could get an update on that when we have more information, that'd be good. My other question was on the Te Tiriti audit. The terms of reference for the revised audit is going to come to the Te Tiriti o Waitangi Committee, is that correct? So we'll have an opportunity to comment on that, because I don't think we quite got it right last time, and I'm really keen to have some input into how we do that moving forward.
And I would add, you'll recall at a meeting last year, the resolution was I write to the chair of that committee in relation to the future reviews.
Yeah, I note that we've got a risk deep dive scheduled to deep dive into that terms of reference to make sure that any concerns raised by FRAC are considered as part of that terms of reference. So we do have that work planned.
Questions from other members of the committee? Can I just make an observation about the fraud maturity work that's been done? I mean, clearly the work previously done by PwC and the work that's underway is all very positive. And I think, we live in a world where, fraud risk, I think, is something that we kind of need to be very sensitive to and aware of. I would just make a point that I have made an offer to both Ellie and to Jacob that in terms of the training and awareness around Greater Wellington, I'm happy to provide some insights about my own personal experience, having been burnt and bruised by a fraudster, just around sort of some of the things that fraudsters do and can, some of the implications that it can have organisationally. So I'm happy to offer that, in a workshop environment or a training environment for staff, just to sort of, just so people can actually sort of be aware of how cunning some of these people can be. Thank you, Jacob. We have the forward program in front of us, which is updated for each of our meetings. Just Ellie, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The current forward work program goes to the end of the triennium, and so as you can see, we now have a blank space on the page, so it's coming fast. We rescope it when a new committee is established, just in case you had some questions around that. We have all the planned papers and the ones that you have asked for in the program, and are happy to take comments or suggestions on the program.
David.
Just one question I had, and I couldn't quite see it in the papers, and it may not be part of our responsibility, but Council has decided to look at potential opportunity for selling off some land in surplus to requirements for the future. My question is that going to form part of the responsibility in terms of this committee?
I know there's some work being done looking at that area to bring the information to full council. I don't know about it coming to FRAC. Nigel, I would have thought full council would have been appropriate, because sale of land has to go through full council approval anyway.
Yeah, I understand that, and because council will have to sign off on that, but I just wondered whether there is a process with that, because it's quite an important issue. Just whether it should go through a committee, and if there is a committee, this is where I potentially see it. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Council. Look, I think that piece of work is kind of in its infancy at the moment. I think we need to do a bit more work as officers first to understand what the potential is to sell off any land we may own, if that is even an option the council wants to pursue. Part of the discussion was in relation to a particular piece of land that would require acquisition in the first place. So, but more strategically, that would be something we'd take through probably our property function to start with, and we'd do a bit of analysis around that. And if there was further work that we can bring back to you, as you've talked about us exploring about the potential to sell off land, then we would have to figure out where the best place for that to come is. And there would be some risks around that, for sure, if that was a decision of the council. So it could be an appropriate place to bring it back here. But if you could just give us a bit more time to understand what the size of the piece of work is, what the consequence of it might be, and then we could then land a position as to where it should best come. There would be obviously council decisions to divest any land if that was your decision, and then the associated kind of risk opportunities around that may be best at council, but give us a bit of time to work through what we're doing at the moment, I think.
Chris?
Thank you. With the workshops, we've got a comment about the Wellington Water and Water Done Well. With the changes of government and the changes to do with water, we seem to have lost touch with the forward costs to residents. And at the earliest stages, I'd like us to get some rough order of cost per household of what the water changes will mean. It doesn't directly influence us, but it influences us in regard to the amount of money that our residents can pay for the services that go to them from Greater Wellington, from the city councils that they work with, and from water. And so we were getting figures at an early stage, and I'm hoping that in the next year or so we'll get some further updates so we can keep it in mind in our long-term budgeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Ross?
I was just going to comment on that. So all your Christmases have come at once, Chris, because the consultation document on the model contains costs. Essentially, the adopting the new model is based on the fact that going through a regional approach will save approximately 30% on our water costs over the next 50 years. So all those costs are laid out in that consultation document. So they will be there for you to read. But I have to caveat with that by saying that obviously the new water entity will determine its own capital program and its own priorities. And so we're just essentially will be working out like what the baseline capital that is currently in the LTP and projecting that forward under the two different models. So the purpose of the consultation document is to contrast the regional model with the approach we have now. It's not to determine what the capital program might be. So you need to appreciate that the capital program isn't determined and won't be determined until the new entity is stood up. So we can't say, the cost will be as a factor of what the capital program is, how ambitious that capital program that is selected by the board running that company. So we can only compare and contrast the capital program, a likely capital program under the new model with the current model.
Yeah, thank you for that, and that's helpful. What I particularly want to do is get some indicative figures of the forward cost on an average per household basis, not so we're questioning the work of Wellington Water or whatever the entity is, but rather just to understand the headwinds that the public are facing for charges and that. And I'm sure that they'll have the fact that they've got a much wider ability to raise debt and that. There will be some rough figures, even if it's based on the previous thing about what levels it might be in there. And I think that's what I was aiming for. But thanks for that, Ros.
Thanks. All right. Look, unless there's anything else, we're asked to endorse the program. I would say to committee members that if between meetings you have views around particularly the workshops that we're going to have through the rest of the year, it'd always be useful to feed those thoughts in. I mean, for me, the workshops are an opportunity, as we will later this morning, to do a genuine deep dive into a topic that is an important topic. So if there are issues that aren't in the workshop program, it'd be good to at least inform me and Ali of that, so that we can, look at the program when we come back to the next meeting. But having said that, we're asked to endorse that, the work program as it stands. Can I have someone move that? Thank you, Roz. A seconder, David. Put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Right, that brings us to a resolution to exclude the public. The resolution is included in the papers. Can I have someone move that? Thank you, David. A seconder. Thank you, Roz. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you. Yes.